A bipartisan group of state legislators blocking an emergency rule that the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services put out dealing with daycare regulations. Back at it. Good morning. I'm Greg Bishop with Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News and Talk banned the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. If you're not familiar with this group, it's a bipartisan group. It's got equal number of Republicans and equal number of Democrats, and they essentially field all of the administrative rules that state agencies write and implement, be they permanent rules or be they emergency rules, when it comes to implementing state law. So the state legislature, the General Assembly, the House and Senate, they pass a bill and the governor signs it if it's got directives, say for instance, the semi-automatic firearms ban, right? Along with that came rulemaking authority for the Illinois State Police to make rules, craft rules, and to file those rules to implement and enact the Protect Illinois Communities Act. Well, the same thing goes for all the other state agencies. And sometimes state agencies are given certain latitude that allows them to craft rules regulating certain aspects of our society. And JAYCAR, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, while they don't approve rules, they do review them, and if they don't agree with them, if they find them to be too onerous for a certain industry, or if they find them just to not be in, the scope of the actual law, then JAYCAR can block those rules and oppose those rules. And that's exactly what happened last week during a JAYCAR hearing that included a variety of different state agencies, but in particular, the Department of Children and Family Services. They were there having to address the concerns that were raised by legislature to see what they can do to shore up these rules. So previous policy that the Department of Children and Family Services had implemented allowed daycare center assistants to daycare centers to monitor rooms of children under the age of 2 for up to 3 hours a day, rather than the new rule that was under debate only allowing for 90 minutes. That allowance was an emergency policy during COVID to allow for the 3 hours of observation, but it was never adopted in a permanent rule despite daycare providers' requests to DCFS to make that happen. So a resolution that was read and ultimately passed unanimously by that bipartisan group of state legislators said that the rule imposes unnecessary economic costs on daycare providers, many of whom have relied on this policy for at least 3 years and may be forced to curtail their hours or reduce their number of classrooms as a direct result of this emergency rule. JAYCAR finds these specific provisions of this emergency rule pose a threat to the public interest and welfare. So that's pretty clear that JAYCAR feels that the emergency rules that the Department of Children and Family Services implemented cause a threat to public interest and welfare. That's a quote, a threat to the public interest and welfare. But during the hearing last week, you had Democrats and Republicans raise legitimate concerns they had. We'll start here with, I believe this is Dave Valla, who is a Democrat from the suburbs, and he shared his concerns with the rule and how it's impacting daycare providers.
You have a group of people who are running daycares, and I think we can all acknowledge that there are definitely staffing issues across the state, especially in relation to daycare, and they're watching and waiting for a new rule, emergency rule, to come out, and nothing has dropped in this month, and that has put people in that I believe we were all fairly clear concerned about these business owners being sent there in limbo, and they were stuck again in limbo for a month. It feels as though, I think from some of us, that there have been some prevarications from DCFS, and I'm just a little frustrated. So
prevarications means lack of candor, means not being truthful. More from the hearing, State Representative
What's your
Stephen Reich.
solution? Because they are screaming for people to be able to do this job. What's your solution other than denying them the ability to have the flexibility to do the kinds of things that they need to do in order to keep their doors open? I don't think you folks belong in this business. This is not part of your portfolio. Your portfolio is to protect the safety of children not to licensed daycare centers. All mandated reporters, if there is a safety issue with regard to it, they're required to report to you, and that's where you come into play. But until that happens, I don't believe you belong in this business, and I believe somebody else is.
So again, state representatives from both parties upset about the rules and the lack of listening to the daycare providers and what they need to thrive. We hear regularly that there's a shortage of daycare operations and staff, and even the governor's carving out tens of millions of dollars to address the issue, but it's still something that very much is not resolved here when it comes to the rules being implemented. And you had State Senator Sue Rezin upset that this seems to be being done regularly with state administration, with the Pritzker administration executive agencies.
Many of the departments are being given great latitude to make decisions that need to go through the legislative process and the debate, and more importantly, the education. As you can tell, we're not, some of us, experts in this field. So for you to sit and explain why it's important that's, for me, a legislative process with a committee hearing and a debate.
So again, it seems that the rule that's in question here deals with limiting daycare assistants' ability to monitor rooms with children under the age of 2. And that was something that the DCFS officials there said that they need to keep in place because they've received hundreds of complaints, and that shows to them and the policy is needed.
These numbers clearly show that leaving an assistant alone without a qualified teacher is a safety concern that cannot be ignored.
But they went ahead and blocked the rule, so it looks like that rule is not in place as of now. DCFS is supposed to be coming back to JAYCAR in the month ahead with a new set of proposed rules, but the frustration was they were supposed to do that 30 days before. But they only filed the new rules whenever it was the last hours before the hearing was set to take place with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. So fascinating to see. Again, this is really how the sausage is made, right? You've got this little-known group. People don't necessarily understand how it works. It's a bipartisan group, select lawmakers from both the House and the Senate, equal number of Republicans and Democrats. They field these rules, and they seem to be voicing concern that the Pritzker administration is continuing on with emergency rules when there's not necessarily an emergency in place. And instead of going through the legislative process, you have this emergency rulemaking that's going on and implementing essentially policy without the legislators, the ones crafting the policy. We saw the same exact concern during that same JAYCAR meeting when it comes to the rules the Pritzker administration filed for undocumented migrant health care, seeming to say that the Pritzker administration had carte blanche to create the rules, but not really much by way of tapping into the stakeholders in these conversations or with the legislators in these conversations. But when it comes to getting it into JAYCAR, then all of a sudden you see indeed there are some significant concerns and problems. So we'll keep an eye on what happens there. But of course, daycare operators, that emergency rule has been suspended per JAYCAR when it comes to allowing for assistants to monitor rooms with children under the age of 2 for more than 90 minutes.